Hey everybody, I am Seth Whiting. I'm a full stack developer from Portland, Maine, and I've been coding for about 10 years now.
And I'm Jake Pacheco. I am a barber from Augusta, Maine, and I've been coding for about 7 months now.
And I'm Wes Bos. I've been coding for about 27 years now. Hokey.
Holy
Ooh,
shnikes.
27 years.
Sorry, 23. 23. I have a
23.
I have a live counter on wesbos.com/about.
Oh,
Nice.
nice. Go check
I
that
mean,
out, everyone.
I feel like anything north of 20 is just okay. Yep, you're
Bonkers.
doing it. Yeah.
Quite
Yeah.
a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. So we've got our very first guest ever on the show, and it's none other than Mr. Wes Bos, which we're so stoked about. I was thinking that we would have to cycle through a good 12 guests before we get to the West Boss level, but here we are.
But here we are. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I'll come on. The thing. People ask me all the time to come on the podcast, and if they're just like if it's just like a send me a link and we'll show up, I'm
Yeah,
game for that. I like talking.
sweet.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see you next week then, too.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see that. Thanks. Welcome to the show. Sweet. Well, yeah, not sure how much you've looked into our podcast that much or anything, but basically we're just kind of more or less an educational and a guiding kind of helping hand for people like myself just getting into it. I'm very new to it, and we've kind of gone over a lot with Seth on how he started and what it was for him, the why he started and everything, what he might have done differently. And so basically, the idea of this episode and any other interview type episodes that we're going to have is basically to ask you and really dig deep into your, 23 years ago, where'd you start? Basically, what made you start? You know? So I
Sounds
guess
great.
that's where we can start is basically like, w- how'd you get started into this and what, made you press the gas
Yeah.
pedal on that?
So very early on, I had the internet. I was the first kid on the block, first kid in my school to have internet. My dad was in IT, so I was kind of exposed to it way back. And I was always curious about how do you get something like how do people get the stuff on there? Like where's the internet? So I kind of dipped around, played with that a little bit. I made a PlayStation 2 website before it went up, which is funny because I'm not a gamer at all. I have no interest in games at all. I think they're stupid. But I got super into the idea that PlayStation 2 was going to be rare, and I made a website about it, and I slept overnight and did all this kind of cool stuff. So I had a popular website on PlayStation 2 back then, and then it really ramped up when MySpace became a thing. I don't know if you remember that, but I was pretty involved in the hardcore scene with all
Yeah.
bands and whatnot. And I have no musical skills or ability, but I love the whole idea of punk and hardcore and all
Hmm.
that. So I was like, well, can computer nerd do, So I
Mhm.
I was making websites, designing t-shirts, all kinds of stuff like that. And pretty much from there, I've just been hacking away, making stuff, building websites ever since.
Yeah,
Nice.
awesome. And
So,
I forgot to say, for anybody who doesn't know who Wes is, which of course you should, he's done so many courses. If you go to wesboss.com/courses, he's basically here to help out people learning how to code. So he's got one called Beginner JavaScript, Full Stack Advanced React and GraphQL, ES6 for everyone, so up to date JavaScript, and JavaScript 30, which is 30 one-off projects. Is that right, Wes? Where you just
Yep.
sort of make something cool with JavaScript. And there's 30 different things that you can make.
Yeah,
So
that's my way
that's
of tricking people into learning JavaScript.
I like it.
so from way back then till now, he's done a lot. Not only have you improved in your coding and everything, but you've also helped so many other people improve in their coding. So that's
Mm,
that's really awesome. And that's, what our show is all about. So yeah.
definitely. So yeah, clearly you started then with I mean, back then, was CSS really that big of a thing anyways, or was it just HTML at that point?
It,
Learning and toiling with.
it's always been CSS. Actually, like that's kind of how I got into it, because in MySpace you could add your own
Yeah.
HTML, but if you wanted to style the existing HTML, you had to figure out how to select the things on the page and apply styles to them. So that's
Mhm.
really my first, not my first, but that's really where I got into separation of concerns and be able to select stuff off the page and apply my styles to it.
Yeah, yeah. I get that. I think that's a lot of us didn't realize we were coding when we did that, when we were looking at our MySpace pages and stuff. So yeah, that's sweet then. So when do you think JavaScript came onto your radar and you really started getting into it and thinking of it as more of like, oh, there might be a future in this for me?
So I had been out of high school, or sorry, not out of high school, out of university.
Mhm.
I went full on into being a freelance dev, running my own kind of consultancy shop. That's because I had had a couple jobs during school, and I realized I don't like this at all working for anybody. I want to be able to do my own thing. So I was doing the building websites for small businesses, pool company and hospital nurses, things like that, building websites. And I the application started to become more and more complex, or the websites became more complex, and I thought, wow, this JavaScript thing is like, it's becoming pretty popular, right? And as
Mhm.
it was at kind of the same time where Node was starting to roll out as well. And I thought, maybe I should just bet the whole farm on this JavaScript thing. So I kind of went all in and said, I'm a full stack JavaScript dev. I'm using Node on the back end. I'm using whatever Angular React on the front end, and kind of said, I'm just going to go all in on this. And it was a bet that thankfully paid off.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you ever get into PHP or any of the other ones before
Yeah,
you got into?
I pretty much started with PHP.
Okay.
So I had built a lot of WordPress, tons and tons of custom WordPress, but
Mhm.
also I was pretty into the Code Igniter, Cake PHP. So I probably did 3 years of mostly being, maybe 4 years of mostly being a PHP dev with a little JavaScript sprinkled on top.
Mhm.
But as the industry not changed away from that, but obviously Laravel was start. I don't even know if Laravel was around then, but I kind of went all in on JavaScript.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. I and I guess a question just so we have kind of a timeline. How old were you when you were kind of starting off on your own as well? Like when you're like, okay, I want to just do my own thing, be out from underneath other people
Yeah,
and go off doing your stuff.
it's tricky because I was in grade 9 or ninth grade, as y'all say down there. I assume you're both American, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Um,
yeah, yeah. We're
so
we're
like I
we're
was
very close to Canada,
We
so I mean,
okay, yeah.
touched Canada.
Yeah, there's like
yeah,
there's like weird things where we say grade 9 and you
yeah.
you say senior and all these weird words that I don't know what those mean.
Mm.
But basically it's like grade 9. I don't know how old you are in grade 9, maybe 14 or something like that.
Yeah, something
15.
around there.
I was like getting paid to build MySpaces and websites for friends' parents and all that stuff.
Y-
So I had always been making money all the way through high school, all the way through university, and it was kind of like I I had these co-ops where I worked for Exxon Mobil, I worked for an investment bank, big
Wow.
corporation co-ops, and I realized this sucks. I remember love it. I'm like, I'm gonna be like Bay Street, which is Canada's Wall Street. I'm gonna be like the Bay Street banker. It was sick. I worked on the trading floor. It was still during the time where they all sat in a desk and picked up phones and did
Yeah.
trades and stuff like that. And I was like this is a dream job that a lot of people would love. And then I realized it was cool, but it's not what I really wanted to be doing. So by the time I hit my last co-op term in school, which I'm so glad I had co-op, I convinced them to let me co-op for myself. Basically, so I just like ran my own business and got credit for it. And the government gave me some student startup money to buy a
Nice.
laptop and stuff. So it was a pretty
That's
sweet
awesome.
deal. Yeah,
So,
yeah. I always talk about the boat getting close enough to the dock to make that jump. And
Mm.
I was really lucky to have to know that before I graduated, before I had any real things in life that I had to care about, that I was like, oh yeah, I can foresee that I don't want to get 6 years into this job and have to make the change. So I'm going to try and make that jump to full time now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. But it's co-op like you work someplace while you're still in school. Is that what
Yeah. So
the idea
my
is?
my program took a 4-year program, and I went to school for business management or business technology management. So it's a business degree, right? It's
Mhm.
not it wasn't like a coding degree or anything like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um so it took a 4-year program and stretched it into 5 years. And then between that extra year and a couple summers, that I think there was room for 3 or 6 month co-ops in between there. And they would try to place you in different types of jobs to sort of get a taste for it. And it's really sweet because a lot of those co-ops will just try hire you right out
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. So it sounds
So
like an
is
internship.
yeah, or
Yeah,
a
yeah.
work study
Kind of
kind of
same
a thing.
thing.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Huh.
Cool. Cool.
That's cool. And I guess just because I'm new to all of this,
Yeah.
where are you from? If you didn't say, are you from Canada? Or are you from
Yeah, yeah,
whereabouts?
I'm from Hamilton, Canada, which is just outside of Toronto.
Oh, okay. Alrighty. Cool.
Right where Counterparts is from, if
Oh,
you
you
if you
know
know
Counterparts?
Counterparts.
Yeah, I've got tickets for them in October with Devil Wears
Oh,
Prada.
nice.
So,
Nice.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Sick. I saw Devil Wears Prada back in the day at the station, I think, in Portland.
Oh,
Um,
sick.
but cool. Hey, bunch of hardcore kids. Anyways. Yeah, so I guess I mean that's awesome. So quite a different story than to what I'm doing, where I'm, 31 years old and just now getting into this. I've a little bit of background on me. I've built computers. I've always been very good with my hands building things. I've
Yeah.
never, but coding was always like the one thing that I was like, that's just, voodoo. That's like such
Yeah.
a untapped thing for me. Um Seth and I have been friends for a few years now, and I knew that he was. So I was like, oh man, I would really love to learn that and eventually have a career in that, just because with barbering, you really have to be behind the chair all the time. The retirement plan is not there.
Yeah.
And with coding, it's just there's a lot of I mean, there's just so much. There's so much you can do with it. So I've been pretty excited about that. And when I told Seth, he was very forthright and excited for me to learn it and stuff. But what I've noticed is, like yourself, I asked Seth, he's like, "Oh yeah, Wes Bos is going to be on the show," and I was like, Why?" Because it was just so. It's just so cool that the coding culture, it seems, is so welcoming and wanting to help all the time. Is that kind of where in the beginning you said that doing it was kind of just a fun thing and you were just intrigued in general by it? Has it now become more of a thing where you just want to help other people code? Or what I guess do you feel is your purpose in coding nowadays?
Yeah. My purpose is it's super fun to be able to build stuff and
Mm.
to solve your own problems, because like that maybe a lot of people listening to this are like you. You're technical, you're able to
Mhm.
figure a lot of things out. And for a lot of people, it's really frustrating when they hit that coding limit. I see the flip side on a lot of electronics tutorials where electronics go from hardware into, okay, now I got to do a little bit of Arduino, and people are always like, it's not my forte, you know? So it's nice to be able to have those skills where you can say, I can literally build anything. I'll
Yeah.
literally to do that. So yeah, there's that, and there's the other part, which is I love being able to share and learn new things and help people along their journey in learning to code, because I've been at it long enough where there's a lot of people who took my courses that are now much smarter than I am and
Yeah.
much further ahead in their coding journey, because they're like they just needed to like I think like coding is just a tool, right? And if you're a problem solver, you know how to make things. Once you know coding, you realize, oh, I can solve problems, I can build things.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. It's just kind of laying the groundwork, the foundation of, oh, now I have all of these tools in my brain that I can just be like, I'll
Yeah.
create this, and this is how I create this. And Seth has told me many times where I'll say, "Oh, here's an idea for an app or whatever," and he's like, he'll think for a second. He's like, "Yeah, I know exactly. I know how I'd do that." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's wild to me to see that, but I guess it's just like anything. It just takes a lot of practice and a lot of studying and stuff. For me, I don't know. I there's some things that right. And you might be able to remember back when this was a reality for you as well, where it's like you pick it up and it's like, oh, this makes sense. And there's some things that you're just hitting your head against the wall, just trying to figure out what does it mean, or like
Yeah.
how can I apply this? And there's been a few times where you kind of get stuck in the mud with that stuff. Do you remember any times like that? Like
Oh yeah.
yeah, with JavaScript, anyways, because that's pretty much what
I
I'm
I
doing.
remember I remember being very clearly, even I remember very clearly where I was and thinking maybe the JavaScript is not for me. Maybe I'm not cut out for it because it's so frustrating to piss away an entire day, especially when you're trying to learn to code. You don't necessarily have all the time in the world. You're trying to squeeze it in on evenings and weekends and whenever you
Yeah.
can. And
Mhm.
if the freaking thing just won't work, it's so frustrating that you want to rage quit it. And a lot of people unfortunately do because it honestly does take a whole lot of time, and it's very like anything, it's much easier just to sort of bow out and say, this is not for me. I'm not the type of person that can do this type of thing, which is I very clearly remember being like, maybe I should just give up on the JavaScript stuff and just sort of stick with my WordPress customizations and whatnot, this HTML and the CSS, because this is way too tricky and I don't understand it all. But I just kind of kept going through it, and I'm very glad I did because now it's a lot. It comes a lot easier to me. I can pick stuff up much quicker, but that initial hump is a real slog.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it can be a beast. I've gone through a few of those. And like you said, I think that the hardest, like the most difficult thing for me is that I also have to, work at the barber shop.
Yeah,
I'm I business owner as well. I run my own barber shop with a few of my friends. And yeah, so I have to kind of run that, keep an eye on that, and then I'm building a house also. And then I have this also. And I just wish that I could just spend all my time doing this, but it ends up being put on kind of the back burner a lot of the time just because I'm doing other things that, I need a house and I need money, right? You know what I mean? Like
yeah, yeah,
I need to
yeah,
work, So yeah, yeah. I guess then a question would be, was there ever a time where I mean, I guess you just kind of said it where you kind of felt like tapping out in a sense, but you always had to you could have fallen back on the PHP thing and stuff like that. Was there ever a time where
yeah.
you yeah, yeah, was there ever a time where you kinda, I don't know, a bit further in your career where you're like, "This isn't for me," or anything? Or did it always just feel such a broad horizon that you could just go in any direction because you already
Yeah,
knew what you knew?
I think because I like it so much, which
Mm,
is like you don't have to love writing JavaScript. It can just be a job. And I think like that a lot of people are like, you gotta live and breathe this type of stuff. And like a plumber is not necessarily loves cutting pipes and whatnot. A
yeah.
lot of them do. A lot of them are enthusiastic. A lot of them have plumbing TikToks and they go to trade shows and all of that stuff. And it's because they love that stuff. And I am very lucky that I am that person in the coding community where I literally can't wait for new stuff to come out. I'm reading
That's awesome.
the results and I'm not feeling overwhelmed like, oh my gosh, so much new stuff is coming out. So that's a major benefit on my end, but you certainly don't need to be there. My advice there would be try and build stuff that you are excited about because
Mhm.
that's the way where you don't have to feel like I gotta find time to work on this. I gotta go to the gym, like that type of
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
where it's like, no, you're gonna want to do that stuff. And you will get there. That's why I have that JavaScript 30 course as well, is that you've got to get those little small wins in and you got to build fun stuff and not just sit
Yeah.
there looping up. Like
Mhm.
you said, why would I find that useful? Where would I even want to use that? That's the most frustrating part is I just sat through 2 hours of tutorials and now I'm just like console logging an
Yeah.
array, and I don't realize where I would actually use that. So I don't know if that
Yeah.
answers your question, but
No, it does.
kind of my
It does.
thoughts. Yeah. Okay.
It answers other questions too. So whatever you have to answer is great for me. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
I had the exact same experience where I started getting into JavaScript and it was like, this is hard. I don't like hard things. I don't, you know,
Yeah.
I don't really want to do this anymore. But then I had the same thing. I got over that hump that you were talking about. And that's when I started like that's when it started getting fun. You know, once you know how to kind of assemble things in the correct way to where it's like I have this problem and I just need to follow these steps in order to solve it. That's when becomes really fun, and that's what I keep telling Jake is like just stick with it. And all of our listeners, you will get to the point where basically once you stop having to think about it so much, then you can build anything, and it's fun, and you have a sense of power and
Hmm.
whatever that you didn't have
Yeah.
before. Do you still face big challenges today in coding?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's all the time. Like a couple days ago, again, I pissed away an entire day on
Hmm.
some WASM FFmpeg issue, which is just like it was combining two areas of programming that I'm not completely comfortable with.
Hmm.
And I just
Mhm.
didn't know how to debug this type of thing or anything like that. So I have lots of those days where you look back and you realize I got nothing done today, or you're like, this is garbage, what I've
Hmm.
built. But that's unfortunately that's part of the learning process, and those wasted
Right.
days are not actually wasted in that you are learning how to be as frustrating as it actually is. That's
Yeah.
good practice for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like those lessons that take the longest are the ones that you will remember the
Yeah.
longest. I will never make that mistake again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always seemed to me that the things that are really difficult to kind of grasp or just difficult in general, they take a long time to do something. By the end of it, it has a lot of staying power because you remember everything you learned because it was such a struggle to learn it. You
Mhm.
know?
You spend
Um,
so much time with it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Now, how long into JavaScript did it take you, do you think, to where you really felt like, yeah, I'm very comfortable. I know what I'm doing in all of this?
Probably like 4 years in,
Hmm.
I kind of said to myself, I still don't know everything, but I know that I could probably figure it out. And
Yeah.
that's an attitude that you should have towards a lot of things in life.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
feel like I feel like I have that attitude in almost every aspect of my life, whether it's I built this office that we're in here right now, and I
Nice.
have
Yeah.
audio recording stuff, and I didn't know how to do any of that stuff, but
Mm.
it doesn't stop me because I say I can probably figure it out. If
Mhm.
not, I can probably ask somebody. If not, I can probably hire somebody.
Yeah.
You got to like
Yeah.
figure out like what's the worst possible scenario that we could hit here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, of
Um,
course.
so I think that's a good attitude to have at it. And now there's lots of things where I don't necessarily know how to do them, but
Mhm.
I know, okay, at least I know the fundamentals of JavaScript. I'm not struggling over semicolons and scoping issues and things like I know
Yeah.
that part. And it's more just about how do these things work together and how would you structure this item and
Mm.
why is something slow or how is something breaking? And
Yeah.
once you know those fundamentals and you've gone through enough of the errors, you say, I probably figure this out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I yeah. I also I build cars and like I said, I'm building my own house right now. So I very, very much
Okay.
have that mentality as well, where it's like, yeah, I'll figure it out. If I don't know it
Exactly.
now, I'll figure it out. And that's very much how I am with this with coding too. I'm like, I know I can figure it out. It might
Yeah.
take me a while. It might, I might be banging my head against the wall sometimes, but I will figure it out. And I think that it's kind of that blind confidence
Yeah.
in going into any problem being like, yep, I got this. Like I don't know. It's gotten me to anywhere that I have been in my life has been because I have that kind of mentality. So yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, 100%. I hear what
That's
you're
true.
saying.
And I know that I know you'll probably do amazing at being a developer because you have those skills in other aspects. I have friends who are in the trades and they
Mhm.
say, I bet you probably would be a good contractor because not because I'm good at sawing logs or anything like that. I hate it. It makes me
Yeah,
sore. I don't
yeah,
enjoy it at all. But you're like you can figure things out. You're a problem solver. You can look at an end result and break
mm,
it down into little smaller pieces and not be overwhelmed with it.
yeah.
There's the one YouTube channel I follow, Aging Wheels, where the guy he works on cars and buses and electronic
Mhm.
stuff. And I watched probably 10 of his videos and I was like, this guy for sure was a developer before he was started this YouTube channel. So I looked it up and of course he was the Android dev. And I was like, I could tell that
Wild.
because of the way he approaches problems.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and that's kind of what Seth is what he said to me when I first started getting into it too. He's like, "Oh, you'll take to it. You'll figure it out." And
Yeah.
I think that Seth had more confidence in the beginning than I did with this, which I appreciate because you kind of need it when you start. And I think that that's I guess that's a question also. Did you have kind of you said your father was in IT and stuff. So was he kind of a supporter of you doing all of this, or did you have other friends in it when you first started and stuff, or was this
Yeah,
just you doing your thing?
kind of all of the above.
Mhm.
So I think probably the biggest thing I had was like free roam access to be able to try to build these things. So I had a computer. I had a split with my sisters, but I got 20 minutes per hour. So I from the 20 to the 40 of the hour I got to go on and
Nice.
at a certain point I saved up enough money to be able to go buy my own computer and to learn this
Awesome.
stuff on it. But I was looking at like I won't say who it is, but I have a friend who has a kid and they brought their iPad over and they're like, "Hey, can you teach me to code?" And I was like, "All right, let's open this website." He's like, "No, my mom has to approve this website." And I was like, I need to talk to them and be like, "You need to give the best thing you can have as a developer is wide open blocks of time
Mm.
and access to the incredible world of the internet just to figure stuff out." And it's not some coding app and whatever. Like those things are great, but you just need a sheer amount of time to
Mm.
put into the stuff. At the end of the day, that's it. So I was lucky to. That's why I'm so glad I learned it early on because I
Mm.
had a lot more time than I
Mm.
do now to learn new things. Right. So
Definitely.
yeah, my dad gave me lots of access to the computer and that type of stuff. But what else? I figured out a lot of it on my own as well. And then when I was in university, I had a couple friends who were able to bounce questions off of and whatnot. So I was really lucky to have like a phone a friend because
Yeah.
certainly you take on projects where you say I can do that. What happens when you can't?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so nice to be able to have a phone a friend that can at least point you in the right direction.
Hmm.
So did you
Yeah.
ever take any courses or anything at all, or is it like are you
Um,
100% self-taught?
I took I took one elective, which elective in school is when a
Y-
course you like you can choose anything. You could take
Yeah.
rhythmic
Hmm.
dancing or something. So I chose to take Introduction to C. So I did one course on C, which was nothing. I couldn't write a line of C to save my life right now.
Hmm.
So everything else is completely self-taught
Yeah.
over the
Hmm.
years, which is good. Like I don't my schooling was amazing because I had again copious amounts of time. Like yeah, I don't think I
Yeah.
realized at the time of how much free time I had, but I
Hmm.
just
Oh
had
yeah.
copious amounts of time to sort of just noodle around and hack on stuff when I was in university.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think that that course in C helped you at all with JavaScript conceptually, like loops and conditionals, anything like that? Or
No,
did you already
I
know
guess
that kind of
I
thing?
already knew all that type of
Okay.
stuff by then. So
Yeah.
Hmm.
I if anything, it taught me how awesome JavaScript is because you don't have to allocate memory for freaking variables.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
Nice.
That's cool. So really, what was your? You said right out of high school, around ninth grade or whatever, you had your first kind of, I don't know, I'll call it business plan, I guess. Did you continue after high school to go on to just work for yourself? And have you done that most of the time? Or did you go to university and work for a few places? You said you did the, what do you call them?
Co-op.
The co-op work study type things.
Yeah.
After that, were you just like, did you work for someone else or did you just go off on your own and just start doing your thing? And what have you done since then, I guess?
Yeah. So in high school, it was just odd jobs, is mostly
Hmm.
just bands who needed MySpace, t-shirt design, graphic design, stuff like that. In university, it was still some of that, but as the scenesters age, they become business owners. They own barber shops and things like that,
Yep.
and they need you to build stuff for that, or their parents need somebody to build stuff. So I did a lot of that through university, and then I did some contracting. A company called Jet Cooper here in Toronto. They eventually were bought by Shopify. So I got to experience a little bit more of the agency life through them and understand what that's like. And man, agency is it's tough, but it's honestly the best because you get a new project every month. You're getting thrown into random projects that you don't know the tech stack of, and you
Hmm.
get skilled up very quickly, and you get to start stuff fresh all the time versus a
Hmm.
product that's been you join Facebook, you're not going to be building stuff from the ground up. But if you're doing agency life, you're building 30 apps a year or something like that. So
Yeah.
it's really, really good for that. So I did that. I did 3 co-ops. I worked at ExxonMobil, oil and gas. I worked at investment bank, and then I worked at a video agency. And that one was really cool because they produced video, but then a lot of their projects needed web stuff to go along with it. So I was
Hmm.
like in charge of the web stuff. I rebuilt their website and did stuff like that. And then by the time I was ready for my fourth co-op, I was like, you know what? I don't like this whole job thing. I don't like working for other people. And I was also
Hmm.
making more money freelancing in the evenings and weekends than I was working for a job. And I remember the last co-op was like, "Hey, we'll hire you full time." And I was like, "Yeah, 65 bucks an hour or something like that." And they're like, "There's no chance." That
Yeah.
does not work out for that. They're like, "We can get I think they're like, we'll give you 23 or something like that." So we're so far apart. I'm like, "Well, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna go do it myself then." I have the business acumen, I'm able to do the emails and
Yeah.
marketing and pick up the phone, all that side of the business. So I kind of went for it there, and I was just working with clients since
Hmm.
then. So I've that was my claim to fame is I've never had a job before. I've been in many offices, I've worked on many teams as a consultant freelancer, but I've never had a honest to goodness job.
Wow.
Bug move.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I Yeah, that's cool. I don't know. Obviously, there's a thousand different avenues. I like the concept of the agency. I think that's kind of a cool idea, and I think that that's kind of what Seth wants to set me up with eventually, or
Yeah.
try to get me to is to that. And I don't know. We've talked a lot about timelines and stuff, and I'm like, it's tricky because I'll talk to some like I had a web developer in my chair the other day, actually. I'm trying to remember what language he was doing. I think he was in C, like C plus plus or something. He was working in robotics. Don't know what that,
Yeah.
if that tells you anything. But anyways, and I was like, yeah, so how long do you think it takes for someone to get ready for this? To be ready to actually go into the coding world and start as a junior developer and learn on the job and stuff. And he's like, "Oh, if you're asking, then you're ready." And I'm like, "I'm not ready." But like, I'm genuinely curious. Have you, because you've done so much in education and stuff, have you talked to people and kind of gotten an idea of how long it takes for someone to actually start getting a job in it or anything like that? Or is it?
Yeah. I think it's the answer to that is before you think you are, because
Mm,
I've heard from lots of people being like, "Well, I just threw my hat in the ring and someone said, 'Yeah, we'll take you.'" And I thought, "Oh, I've for sure not ready, and it's way over my head, but it's
Yeah,
amazing
that's
how
how I
quick you
feel.
get
Yeah.
skilled up when you're
Hmm.
on a team, especially someone who's willing to train. Because I'm not sure how true this is in the last 6 months since the economy starting to go down, but
Hmm.
there's there was, and still in a lot of places, a major shortage of good developers. So there's always companies kind of like NBA scouting, looking for undiscovered talent, because it's way easier to, oh, let's find the developer who's just learning to code, but a good manager is able to see past not understanding the syntax, but can see, oh, clearly you have good communication skills, good problem solving skills, the
Yeah.
rest of the package of being a good
Hmm.
developer. The one part we're missing is they don't know the method syntax for looping over an array by heart, and they have to look it up.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So people are like, oh, I'm gonna make my own 10x
Yeah.
developer. So
Yeah.
yeah, when do you know you're ready? It's really hard to say. I think as
Yeah.
soon as you, maybe if you could build an application that is a CRUD, you can create an item, you can maybe not even necessarily behind auth, but you have a form on the page, you style it to look nice, you can type in the box, you hit submit, and you can
Mm.
list all of your data that's reading. You can update each of the individual ones, and you can delete an item. If you could build an app
Mm.
that can do that based on a framework, not necessarily from scratch, I think you're in
Yeah.
pretty good shape to start start something.
Yeah,
Sweet.
Jake, if that went over your head, so CRUD
I
is
oh.
CRUD. Do you know
Mhm.
that one? It's an acronym.
We've talked about it before. I know that, but no, no. Go
Yeah.
go ahead.
So those create, read, update, and delete. Those are
Oh,
sort of like
okay.
the
Yeah.
four basic functions of an application,
Okay.
like
So it's just being able
like a
to
to-do list.
edit in the background and stuff, or in the
So
the
like
back end. Yeah.
saving data to a database, reading
Hmm.
it from the database, updating the data in the database, and then deleting the data from the database,
Yeah.
basically all the
Yep.
way from the front end to the back end. That's like, if you can build a CRUD app,
Hmm.
then you can kind of modify it enough to build most things.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. That's kind of the answer that I've gotten from, if you Google it online or anything like that. Everyone's like, yeah, it's pretty much, a lot of places will kind of teach at the on the job, which is really sweet. And what you said with that, where they're looking more for a personality even than coder who's, really well
Yeah,
versed in all the syntax or something. It speaks volumes to it's exactly how I look for barbers that work in my barber shop. I can't make someone have a good personality.
yeah,
I can make just about anyone be able to cut hair well, but if they cut hair well and they don't have a good personality, then I can't fix that. You know? So it's you do kind of have to have
very
someone that
true.
has the personality that can adapt to it. So yeah, what you said, just yeah, it makes perfect sense.
I had a
Yeah.
question, Wes. What
Yeah.
do you think about so basically at the start of all of this, I was like, you should skip building websites and just go straight into building apps. Let's just commit to that, go big or go home kind of thing. Let's learn everything from the front end to the back end. But what do you think about that? Do you think that he should maybe start at a WordPress dev shop or something, and then kind of work into more back end heavy stuff? Or what, do you have an opinion on all of that?
Yeah, I that's a good question. I don't necessarily know what the best way forward, but I don't know that skipping the whole website thing would be a good idea, especially because a lot of the trends we're starting to see now is we're going back to a lot of web fundamentals, form submits, server rendering, all that good stuff. So
Hmm.
a lot of what I learned in my PHP days is becoming very relevant these
Yeah.
days. So also, I think probably a lot of the stuff you're going to be doing early on is HTML markup and then CSS making it look good. So I think that
Hmm.
those are probably the things that you need to sort of nail first, and then looking into adding functionality, contact form, and then, oh, okay, well then now let me list things. And even your own barbershop's website is probably a good spot to start with something like that.
Yeah.
Yes, I was thinking basically if you can get your head around JavaScript and get into it and excited about JavaScript, then
Yeah.
sort of picking up HTML and CSS on the way, sort of like as a necessity for making your JavaScript work in a web page, is sort
Yeah.
of, in my mind, a more kind of interesting way to go about it. It will keep you interested more.
That's true, because at least you can make stuff that does something a lot
Right.
sooner, you know? That's the thing, is like I was trying to teach my nephew to code, and he immediately wants to make a game. He immediately wants it to do something and look sweet and do cool things. And the layout is not as exciting for someone. So honestly, follow your heart, right? Whatever it is that's most exciting to you, that's
Mhm.
probably the cheat code, is
Yeah.
Yeah. The
whatever
thing
you're
with Jake
stoked
is
about.
Jake doesn't really know what's possible yet. Like he wouldn't
Yeah.
know, oh, I should start with HTML and CSS before I get into JavaScript, or I should start with JavaScript because it's more interesting or whatever. So he's
Yeah.
kind of depending on me to steer him in the right direction. And now I'm
I
depending
think
on you to help me steer him in the right
to,
direction.
to
I think
adjust
if you
your
know like enough basics, just you don't have to know everything. People always say get to know your fundamentals 100% before you move forward, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I didn't learn that way. I started
Mhm,
with WordPress and jQuery and kind of worked my way back
mhm,
because, like you said, it does something immediately. And then I said, and as you hit issues, you sort of fill in the gaps that you want, right? So it, of course, linearly, it might make sense to learn that way, but a lot of times you're taking something that already works or a template or something like that and kind of
Mhm.
tweaking it to do what you want. I think that a lot people work very similar to that in my
mhm.
experience. So it might not necessarily be a bad idea.
So
Yeah.
if you had somebody approach you from square one, blank slate, what do you have an idea of what you would advise them? Where should they start, kind of thing? Or some sort of
Yeah.
roadmap for start here and then do this kind of thing?
I always tell people you got to learn some basic HTML and CSS first. So build
Mhm,
a site or two, do a simple layout. Doesn't have to be complex. Doesn't have to be like grid layout. Just put some
Mhm.
stuff on the page, change the fonts, change the colors, understand what an element is, be able to inspect and debug and change the colors
Mhm.
on that. And that's what I always tell them, because I don't have a beginner CSS or Java, or sorry, I don't have a beginner HTML or CSS course. So I always tell people who are brand new to coding, like, "Hey, can I take your JavaScript course?" And the answer to that is no. You have to understand what a button is and what an element is.
Yeah.
And as soon as you
Yeah.
understand that, just enough to squeak by,
right.
then okay, now we can start getting into the JavaScript and making it dynamic and whatnot. And
Mhm.
and then once you understand what event listeners are and what looping are and what arrays are and all the different data types,
Mhm.
then maybe you can start dipping your toes into a framework like React or Next.js or SvelteKit or
Mhm.
something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, so
Yeah.
my quandary is I know that full stack development basically is going to be the most profitable or whatever, like that's going to have the most, the biggest value at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But there are several things that you could do that would take less time that wouldn't necessarily make as much money as that, or sustain, make you self-sustainable as much. But yeah, basically the trade-off is, do you go big and go for the big paying stuff,
Yeah.
but commit to learning a while before you get anything, or should you kind of take an intermediary step and make websites first? uh, my dilemma.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think if you can try to figure out how to go straight for what people are hiring for,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
probably your best bet, because at the end of the day you're trying to get a job, trying to get your foot in the door to get that first job.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So if you can sort of hack it, and I'll also say this is that there's probably a lot of people who are willing to hire for JavaScript where your HTML and CSS aren't ideal, but
Mhm.
Mhm.
there's not a lot of jobs out there where you can just do HTML and CSS and you don't have to touch JavaScript. A lot of people always ask me that. It's like, do you think I can get a job and just do HTML and CSS and leave the JavaScript for somebody else? And I don't think those jobs really exist all that much anymore. So if you have to hack it and go straight for JavaScript, that's probably better than the alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that. I'll say because I started with JavaScript, learned a bit of that and stuff, and then when I went into learning HTML and CSS, I was like, oh, this is so much easier to pick up than JavaScript was or is, just because there's so much depth to JavaScript, and I'm sure there is with HTML and CSS that I haven't uncovered yet, but just it seems the way that everything is put in place with HTML and some with CSS is like, wow, this is so straightforward. It makes sense that all of this does all of this. Whereas, and also even just in the language, the way that they'll teach it to you, where it's like, yeah, no, this is a paragraph. It makes sense. Whereas they're like, oh yeah, this is your variable and you're going to adjust these variables and this array with this. And it's like, you're learning all of all this terminology all at once. And it's like, oh my gosh, what, like just trying to keep track of what everything is: object, variable, array. It just becomes a lot with JavaScript sometimes. But then when you start doing it in React, and it all works together, kind of, it starts to, I don't know. I like the way it handshakes a lot more, and the way things are written, it makes sense. It's like, yeah, in this paragraph, I want these things adjusted, and this is written like this, and I don't know. I guess from the learner's perspective, I'm like, the minute I started writing things in React, I was like, oh man, why wasn't I doing this the whole time? Just because when am I ever going to just write just vanilla JavaScript? You know what I mean? I guess is it, other than, I guess, what's it called? When I'm adjusting legacy code or something, or old code that someone might have written that isn't in React. I don't know.
Yeah. I think the thing to know is that when you're writing React, you're writing JavaScript, right? And you still need to know how events and all that stuff works. And I think if you were to dip into a lot more vanilla, you'd be like, oh, this is in React. But it kind of does away with all of the, why doesn't this change when this changes? I remember one of my students put a variable in a paragraph, and then they updated the variable, and they're like, why isn't the paragraph updating? And, well, it's not reactive. You have to update the thing, and it becomes a mess very quickly, right? It's kind of hard. That's why we have frameworks. So if you can do away with a lot of those tripping hazards, I like to call them, then it makes the learning a lot easier, because there's not all these like, well, here's all these little gotchas you need to know, and it's literally just go ahead and make the thing you want.
Yeah. So I guess the two options in my head are full stack development versus go get a job at a WordPress dev shop. I think people are still hiring for that kind of thing. And I don't know. Yeah. Basically, the route that I kind of decided to put him on was the former as opposed to the latter.
Let's also say he didn't just go, hey, Jake, this is what you're going to do. He was like, well, what would you rather do? Would you rather learn all of it, which is going to take you a while? Or do you want to just get into a job? Any old job will do, just in web development, regardless. And I said 100%. I would love to be able to build something from the beginning to the end and know everything that it does. So and now we're here.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, but a big thing for beginning developers, especially ones who just got their first job, is the concept of imposter syndrome. Did you ever feel that, Wes, in your career?
Yeah, not as much as I think a lot of people have, because we're talking about my wife always says I have I forget what she said, unapologetically confident. She said that I was, which is just like, I think I could figure it out. But yeah, a lot of times when you take on a job and you go, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, or first time I got asked to speak somewhere, I'm like, you want me to speak there? I don't know what I'm doing that type of thing. I think what you need to realize is that everybody is just winging it. Everybody's Googling everything. Everybody's just figuring it out. There's very few people that are literal geniuses, and often those people don't have very good communication skills or whatever. So if you look and you see somebody who's like a god amongst programmers, they are either just like you or me, and they just have been hacking away at it for so long, or
Mhm.
they are one in a million. And
Yeah.
most other people are just regular people googling stuff, figuring it out. And you need to know that it's not uncommon at all.
Yeah.
Mm.
Who would you consider to be a god amongst programmers out of curiosity?
I don't even know because I don't necessarily like that type of stuff where
Hmm.
people
Mm.
put developers up on pedestals and say they're, because it's all about community. And there's certainly a lot of framework authors who I think are really clever and smart,
Hmm.
and I appreciate their insights into to quite a bit of stuff. But if you think about someone like Linus Torvald who made Linux,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
Yeah.
um, Fabrice, I forget his last name, the guy who made FFmpeg, which is just amazing, or the
yeah.
guy who works on
Mm.
YouTube DL, they're just prolific type of stuff they made. And generally those types of people are working on low level projects that are next next level. Ryan Dahl's probably a good example. Is that Ryan Dahl had not a whole he's the creator of Node.js. And
Hmm.
if
Mhm.
you go and watch the first talk that he did to explain what Node.js was, it was very clear that he was 99% programming genius and percent good at it. And he's one of those people who's just like, yeah, you are working on a next level programming language, stringing together these ideas. People are calling you crazy for doing what you're doing. And to me, that type of person is amazing. But
Yeah.
most of us are updating variables on a page.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the people that we need to reach out to for being guests on the show next.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
just to rewind a small bit is when you were saying how your wife looks at you when you just pick up things and stuff like that. It reminds me of maybe my favorite quote, and it's he attacked everything in life with a mix of extraordinary genius and naive incompetence, and it was often difficult to tell which was which. That's like my
Yeah,
favorite
that's
quote because
beautiful.
that's yeah. I'm like, yeah, 100. Yeah, I can do that. And it's like, yeah, but you might be being naive. Yeah, whatever. I'm confident I can do it. It's
Yeah.
not.
Did
It's
Yeah,
you
yeah.
write that one,
and
Jake?
sometimes you realize, you know what? I couldn't do that, or I definitely dropped the ball there. And
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
you, that's it's the friends you made along the way that really matters.
Right. And you learned something. You learned you couldn't do it. It's
Exactly.
yeah. It's Douglas Adams. So, someone who is probably from the 20s gets credit.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Somebody asked me that. I fix a lot of stuff around the house, a lot of electronics,
Mhm.
and everyone says like, "Oh, I would be too scared to open that up." But I'm just like, you know what? The amount of time I throw it in the F it bucket is very high.
Yeah.
But I'm not
Yeah.
afraid to throw it in the F it bucket. I'm like, worst
Yeah.
case, this thing gets thrown in the trash. Best
Yeah.
case, I fix it.
Yeah, worst case, it's just as broken as it was when I touched it at
Right.
first. It's already
Exactly.
broken. It doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Wes,
what were
you
you gonna
you
say?
mentioned just a second ago, just in passing, you said, "Oh, I dropped the ball on that one." Can you remember any career moments where you feel like you dropped the ball?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I probably blocked those out of my memory. Let me think a
Okay,
second.
it's like those
Too
those are like
traumatic.
seared out. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't necessarily know about dropping the ball or letting people down,
Mhm.
because I've kind of worked for myself. I've
Right.
Mm,
always
yeah.
I've always tried to be very upfront with clients and whatnot, and that's sort of avoided that. But just projects that fizzle out or things that I think are going to be a good idea, and I'll
Mm.
put a whole bunch of time into it, and then like I was writing a book on build tools maybe 8 years ago,
Mm.
And then I got like 6 months in, I realized, you know what? This stuff changes so quickly and it's
Mhm.
so complicated and it's so dependent on everything. I don't think that this will make a very good piece of content. So I sort of scrapped it at that point.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
I guess that's one example we have there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, as far as in your career, I guess you depended on getting clients and stuff a lot. So, one of the questions that we had written down to ask you is how much of a role do you think people skills and soft skills or whatever played in your particular career?
Quite a bit, I think. So I don't have the best interpersonal skills and I'm not necessarily the best at formulating my thoughts, which is hilarious because I have a podcast.
A podcast.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think being able to write a good email, pick up the phone, writing a good email is a really important one. I often have Scott, my co-host, before we sent off when we were doing sponsors and stuff, he would always send it through me. And I was like,
Mhm.
this sounds mean. Like, why are you sending it like that? Like, people don't know how to
Sounds
address
mean.
tone and to get that stuff across. So I think
Mm.
that is super important, knowing how to get thoughts across, clearly communicate what it is you're trying to convey.
Mhm.
And just yeah, a lot of times, a lot of the jobs are from you go out for beers with somebody and then they say, oh, you know what? I have a buddy who needs a website. Or so
Yeah.
much of that was just word of mouth. And it was all based on, I don't know how good of a JavaScript programmer this West guy is, but seems cool.
Yeah.
I could probably help you out, So
Mm.
that was, and a lot of the jobs I got early on were just from going to, they were tweet ups at the time. So we would
Yeah.
go to a bar and there would just be a bunch of Toronto Twitter users there because Twitter was so small that you could fit all the Toronto Twitter users in a room
Yeah.
and you'd meet a lot of people and a lot of those people were in tech and that's how you get a lot of the jobs. So it's just about shaking hands, kissing babies, getting to know people. Such an important skill to have, I think.
How
Mm.
many babies do you think you kissed in your career?
A lot of grown men. Yeah.
Not a corner. Same.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, if you didn't know, if he didn't tell you, Scott actually agreed to be our second guest, so
Oh,
we
there you
can
go.
bring up
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a perfect example of having good people skills is that
Mhm.
Scott, my co-host on the podcast, released a course under the same name of a course that I had. And I
Right.
emailed him and said, hey, could you not? And because both of us have good people skills, I was able to word an email nicely enough. And that sort of showed my point of view. And
Mhm.
he was able to understand, hey, yeah, maybe I can work with you.
Mhm.
And we became friends after that and started insanely
Nice.
popular podcast,
Yeah.
because if both of us were jerks, then that would have never happened. And it's amazing how many doors can be opened by being cool to someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
I fully agree with that.
Yeah, I wonder how do you think that a developer can make it in the field if they don't have good people skills?
Oh yeah, I think so because a lot of developers are just really smart. I say
Yeah.
most of them have good people skills, but if your smarts can outweigh the fact that you don't have good skills and
Mhm.
a manager can manage you,
Yeah.
then absolutely. But at least in my journey where I've never really had a manager, it's just been communicating with people. That's been pretty important. And I think those initial introductions I got from meeting people were super important.
Right.
Mm,
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I think,
definitely.
I've met I've definitely met a bunch of developers with varying people skills, and
Mm.
some of them are really good and don't have a lot of people skills, and you know, some of them are
Yeah.
Yeah.
the
And
opposite.
it can also, it's just, it's something that can certainly be learned. It's not like, oh, I'm not
Mm,
good at people skills. Because we had Ryan Dahl on our podcast
mhm.
a couple of months ago, and the guy is so eloquent in the way he speaks, and he has such good outlook on life and
Yeah.
everything. Even the way he had a sick pick and it was a kite. He's like, go fly a kite. And he explained why flying a kite was such a nice thing to do. And I was like, this guy's like a poet with his words. Go back 12 years ago and he had a hard time explaining why Node.js was such an exciting thing. So obviously
Mm,
he's learned and gotten really good at that communication point of view. And
mm.
Yeah.
that coupled with being a literal genius is worked out for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I actually remember that episode. That was a good episode. But
Huh. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I had a feeling. I mean, I think that's how it is with a lot of jobs. I know I've gotten jobs before I was a machinist, before I was a barber, and that I didn't know. I had never touched a machine before. I had never vertical lathe, horizontal lathe.
Yeah.
Any of that stuff was just gibberish to me. So, but I was able to, kind of talk my way into the job, and I was like, hey, I have mechanical skills, and I figure it out.
Yeah.
And I just that again approached it with that confidence kind of a thing, and it worked out. And Seth and I have kind of talked a lot about that. And I feel like there's a misconception about programmers in general, though, that they're all very kind of reclusive, kind of cryptic,
Yeah.
quiet people. And but every programmer that I've met so far has only tried to help me get into it or been actually pretty talkative about it. And
Exactly.
it's kind of odd that's the misconception that's gone around, I guess.
yeah.
And it's just because it's like you're at home on a screen a lot of the time or something, so they kind of assume that, you know.
I
Yeah,
could be totally
that is
wrong.
that has changed from the
Mm,
early days,
yeah,
Right. That's what I
yeah,
was going to say. I feel like it was sort of that was the thing a while ago, but I think because it's become a lot more accessible in the past decade or two or whatever, I feel like more people, just normal people, not like super geniuses like Linus Torvalds or anyone like that, is like, oh yeah, I can actually do this. Everything is so
yeah,
abstracted now. Like, oh, I just need to put these building blocks together and I
Mhm.
can actually make something now.
yeah,
Uh, that your average everyday person can just pick it up and run with it. And
yeah.
they don't need to start with writing machine code and to make their own video games or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't need to be some dungeon basement dweller to learn
Yeah,
this. It's
right.
just you got to be a problem solver.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can be like me and love talking to people, love D&D, and learning coding.
There you
You'd be
go.
all the things. Who knows? So I guess just the full question, I guess, is if you were to start coding right now, or you have someone really close to you that, or your clone, it needs to learn coding, and you're like, hey, this is how you get started in web development with JavaScript. How would you get them started, do you think?
I'd say obviously start a little bit of HTML, CSS, be able to
Hmm.
build a page, lay it out, and then I'll plug my if it's a friend of mine, I'll give them
Of
free
course.
access to my beginner JavaScript course because that's literally people ask me how do I get started with JavaScript, and that's beginner JavaScript.
Yeah.
Or if people say, yeah, I understand the basics of it, but I just want to get better. That's what my JavaScript 30 course, that one's free, is basically just
Nice.
you need to build a lot of stuff, you need to do it
Yeah.
over and over and over again before you get better. So that's it. There's no single ticket to it. Often people say, oh, yeah, I got 6 months. I want to learn. I want to get a job. And
Yeah. That's
a
yeah.
little bit more messy than that, right? It's a little bit
Yeah.
more of find your own way. And of course, there's courses and stuff that can speed you up quite a
Hmm.
bit versus the time it took me to learn. But you just got to put in the time. You got to build stuff, and ideally, you'll get excited about it and have
Hmm.
ideas and start to go off on little tangents. Because that's what I see the most exciting thing is when someone takes my course. They say, "Yeah, I took your course." And sometimes they're like, I didn't even finish it, but I got 80% of the way through. And I thought, you know what? I have an idea. I'm going to build something else. And I was able to take
Nice.
your app and turn it into what I want. I was able to understand enough of the parts and build it into what it is I wanted to build.
Yeah, that's cool. That's wicked cool. I mean, that must be super exciting for you also to be able to see, people actually like creating careers out of the stuff that you're teaching. That must be pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
the app Riverside we use to record our podcast is built on one of my Node courses. And he said there's still
What?
code from the
That's
course.
so
And it's like,
cool.
I use this thing like 3 times a week to record a podcast.
Yeah.
And it's the guy who built it. I don't even know if I could build that thing, but the guy who built it took my course to learn how to learn the fundamentals and said, okay, I can see how I can now turn this into
Wow.
something.
That's
That's insane.
sick. Yeah, because that's what I was talking to Seth about was Riverside recently. I was like, hey, should
Yeah.
we do this? But that's so cool.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
you know, we've taken up a lot of your time, but you know, super appreciate it. Before we go, definitely want to open the floor to you to plug anything that you want people to check out or anything like that. We haven't done sick picks before, so we probably won't start now, but shameless plugs,
Yeah.
we can do
Yep.
that.
So wesbos.com, wesbos.com/courses, list of all my courses, bunch of free ones, bunch of paid ones. I have cssgrid.io, which you're gonna learn CSS Grid, Flexbox.io, it's a free one for learning Flexbox, some intro ones to React, some advanced ones, beginner JavaScript. Just take a look and see what you got there. I'm kind of in this business to help people to learn to code and to launch their careers off of it.
Yeah. And I would definitely say if you are into developing enough to where you kind of feel a bit comfortable, that's a perfect time to start listening to Syntax. So Syntax is Wes and Scott Tolinsky's podcast, which is the best web development podcast out there. I started listening to it in 2017, I think, and that was a huge catalyst for holy crap, I'm learning so much and I'm able to apply this immediately today to what I'm working on. So that was a huge boost in my career. So thank you for making that podcast.
Awesome. Oh, you're welcome.
And yeah, so if you are listening to this and you already know a little bit of how to code, I would say, start checking them out too, for sure.
Yeah. And I also just want to say thanks so much for being on here with us, bud. It means a lot less. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's fun. I'm glad to join you.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks. Well,
yeah.
As always, listeners, stick with it. Keep going.
Swimming.
Keep swimming, and get over the hump and get on Wes's level.
Yeah. Get it together.
Peace.
Peace.
Thanks. See ya.